Alexa, stop. Hi, and welcome to Quarantine Cocktails.
Hi, everybody.
I'm Chad, and this is Nicole, aka James and Vesper for today. We're presenting on the Martini, and we thought we'd have a little fun with the James Bond theme. So the Martini is a fantastic classic cocktail, and we're very excited to be talking about it today. It's probably one of those drinks that inspires a lot of commentary about the exact way to do it right. And we will talk about some of those things, and we will also put the famous shaken versus stirred to the test. So, Nicole, you want to tell us a little bit about the history of the Martini?
Sure. So the history of the Martini actually goes back to the 1860s, where it was actually known as the Martinez. And that was because it was in Martinez, California, which is in the Bay Area, the East Bay. It was primarily gin and sweet vermouth in those days. And then over time, there was an emergence of a drier version around 1912 that was associated with the Knickerbocker Hotel in New York City. It was primarily 2 parts gin and 1 part dry vermouth. And then during Prohibition, where gin was being produced rather cheaply, the popularity of the Martini skyrocketed, and vermouth was usually used to mask the low quality of the gin, and that leads us to the Martini recipe, which is about 6 parts gin to 1 part vermouth. So
for the drier
drier
Martini.
version, yeah. For the dry Martini. So it over time it became popular to use less and less vermouth, so much so that sometimes it called for a dash of vermouth or a splash, or sometimes even just rinsing a glass was enough.
Yeah, to the point where some people were like, oh, just wave the bottle of vermouth at your glass of gin from across the room, or as Noel Coward once said, toast your glass of gin in the general direction of Italy. So vermouth kind of gets maligned amongst a lot of Martini drinkers, but as you may know from our earlier discussion, I'm actually a big fan of vermouth, especially if you can get a nice quality vermouth that's got some good flavor to it. And so I don't necessarily subscribe to the cutting out or cutting way down on the vermouth. I think it's a necessary part of the cocktail and really enhances the cocktail a lot. That said, we'll present the cocktail versions here. So the classic Martini, as I said, as Nicole pointed out, was 2 ounces of gin and 1 ounce of dry vermouth. It later became the drier version with 3 ounces of gin and a 1/2 ounce of dry vermouth. Traditionally the preparation is a stirred preparation because, as we mentioned before, it's an all spirit cocktail, and therefore stirring is preferred in general. And you're going to strain it into, of course, a nicely chilled glass. And the traditional garnish for either of these martinis versions is with olives or with a lemon twist. Now, as we mentioned, there are a lot of variants of the Martini that have emerged over time. Besides playing with how much vermouth or lack of vermouth you want to make use of, there is the dirty Martini, which sometimes which you splash the olive brine into the drink, sometimes even replacing the vermouth altogether with just that olive brine splash. There's the Gibson, which is used with a pickled olive instead of the other garnishes that we mentioned, and sometimes with a dash of orange bitters or another bitter thrown in. The vodka martini is a popular variant where you simply replace the gin with vodka. The smoky martini, where you use an Islay Scotch instead and replace some portion of the dry vermouth, often half, depending on how much you're planning to use. And then there's the perfect martini, where you use half sweet vermouth and half dry vermouth. So those are some of the well-known variants of the martini that are fun to try and worth exploring to see what you enjoy the most. And that brings us to our other part of our history lesson, I guess, which is the famous martini that Ian Fleming introduced as the drink of the ever dapper and debonair James Bond. And this, I think, has done a lot for revitalizing the interest in the martini. And it also brings up, of course, the controversy of shaken, not stirred, as he orders it. So in the Fleming novel, the drink is presented as 3 ounces of Gordon's gin, 1 ounce of vodka, and a half ounce of Lillet Quina. It is shaken, not stirred, and then served in a deep champagne coupe. So that is the actual recipe from the book. And that drink has since been dubbed the Vesper, where it's a combination of gin and vodka, and then using the Lillet as the replacement for the vermouth. Now, Lillet Quina, Lillet in general is a maker of a French aperitif wines. The Lillet Quina is a particular version that they no longer make. And so in order to reproduce this cocktail today, we go with the Lillet Blanc, which looks like this. And it is not as bitter as the Lillet Quina. So this is actually a little bit, when you use this, you're going to end up with a more citrus and not quite as dry martini as you might have with the Quina. The other elements that we're going to change up the recipe a little bit to provide some updating, perhaps, to the cocktail and maybe slightly improved ingredients. Instead of Gordon's gin, we're going to use the Botanist, which is a wonderful gin from Scotland. It's an Islay gin with a large number of herbs infused into it. And it's a very herbaceous flavor profile. So this is one of my favorite gins, and especially when I want to go for something with more in the dry and herbal direction, rather than say a floral direction that some gins can go in. So this will be the base of our cocktail, and we'll be using 3 ounces of this, and then I've selected Belvedere vodka as the vodka to use. It's actually not specified in the cocktail recipe. Belvedere is a Polish vodka, and I selected this Polish vodka in honor of the inspiration for the character of Vesper Lind, which was a woman who went by the name of Christina Granville. She was actually a Polish-born spy working for Britain. And she had a very colorful and interesting life. There are rumors that she had an affair with Ian Fleming. I don't believe that is actually, I think that's apocryphal. But she was a very interesting character, and it's well worth reading through her biography. It's quite extensive, actually. And she did a lot in service of Her Majesty. So Polish vodka in honor of her. And then those are the 3 ingredients of this drink, to be followed with garnished with a large slice of lemon peel. And so one thing to note about this drink is that it is a very big and large amount of alcohol. And so I encourage you to drink responsibly.
Share with a friend.
Share with a friend. Take the recipe and split it in two if you like. So, you know, you need to be, the martinis done really well are super refreshing and go down very quickly. And so, you know, just be aware of that, you know, this is a lot of booze that you are going to be consuming with this particular cocktail. So you can also, you know, just cut it in half and do that. I'll get to that afterwards, yeah. So here's the cocktail. Now we're going to do both a shaken and a stirred version of the cocktail, and then do a taste comparison and another, you know, comparison of the other aesthetic qualities of the drink, and then you know, each of us will weigh in on what we think and which one we prefer. So let's get that going.
Following along at home, what do they need to get out?
So you know, get out your gin, your vodka, your vermouth or Lillet if you have it, and of course a lovely fresh lemon for the lemon garnish. So we will pour the gin first. That is the largest component. Yep.
Pour it for both?
Yep, I will do it for both.
Okay.
So 3 ounces. Oh, not quite 3 ounces in here, is there?
Yes.
Yes. And then an ounce of the vodka for each of us. And then a half ounce of the Lillet, which conveniently is a tablespoon's worth. All right. All right. Don't put too much Lillet in. What would Noel Coward say? All right. So now we will generously ice both of our cocktail shakers.
How much ice do you usually put in?
I'd like to fill it at least halfway. It depends how big the cocktail is in some ways.
You need some ice?
We might need a little. We got this ice here, keeping our glasses chilled here, so we'll just make use of that for yours especially. And then Nicole is going to vigorously shake.
Yes, while you stir.
While I stir. And of course, we should be doing this for
Let's get our...
at least 45 seconds to a minute. Now, if any of you watching along have any questions, you know, feel free to pop some questions in the chat. I see we have one question. Is there a Debbie Gibson variant? No, but that sounds very interesting. What would that look like, do you think? Drinking alone? I don't know.
So how long do you shake if you're shaking?
You're going to shake for about the same. So part of it is trying to get the dilution. Now the difference between the two is really going to be around the aeration. All right. I think we are good. You can see the condensation. You can see that shaking has gotten this shaker very, very cold. So
much so that, there we go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that one can be a little tricky. So I will put the strainer top on top. We will pour our cocktails into these deep champagne coupes. Now these coupes can hold something like 10 ounces. These are very big coupes comparatively. And, but that's fine. You know, for your own home use, for a regular martini, you could use a smaller glass. You know, these Nick and Nora glasses are quite popular. This holds about 5 ounces, which is pretty good for, like, you start with a 3 ounce, 3.5 ounce martini recipe. with the dilution, you're going to come up pretty close to the 5 ounces. Now,
and you can see the color variations.
yeah, the difference in clarity, right? The one that has been shaken is going to be cloudy because of the aeration, whereas this one is clearer from the stirring. Also, with the shaking, you're generally going to end up with small bits of ice on top. And as we compare, there's been more dilution on the one that Nicole did, whether that's just a function of the shaking or just some differences in our technique, not clear. Then we will give a nice slice of lemon to finish these cocktails off. So a nice slice of the lemon peel.
Express the...
Right? So we're both going to express our lemon on the inside. Right? You can even rub your lemon peel on the inside to really make sure you get some nice citric qualities there.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes I like to just put a little cut in mine to like sit it up there, or you can tear it. And you have your nice looking cocktail. All right. So there is our cocktail. All right.
Let's see what we like better.
Yes, so we're going to taste and compare.
Very smooth. Very chilled. Little icy.
Mm-hmm. Some people like that little sensation of the ice on the top of their martini.
Mm-hmm.
People who favor the shaken martini.
So the stirred, to me, feels much more booze forward. Much more
Mm-hmm. That's probably
gin.
Probably a function of the difference in the dilution that we can see, because we put in the same amount of liquid modulo the dilution from the ice. And so, yeah, this one is going to be a little bit stronger in the taste. And this one is going to be a little weaker,
Even though it's the same volume.
And that's not a judgment. That's just sort of,
a preference.
Partly towards your preference and how you like to have it come out. So, my own take on the shaken versus stirred. Some people talk about bruising. Some like the gin, that seems mostly a fantasy. But so I think a lot of it is about how you like to enjoy your drink. Do you like that texture? Do you like maybe slightly more dilution? Do you like the clarity that you get from the stirring? Can you reach the same temperature? I think that the shaken one actually did get colder than the stirred one. So maybe I should have stirred a bit longer to reach to get it a little cooler. But overall, I think it's really mostly a preference, and everyone should give it a try and see which one you prefer.
There really is no wrong answer.
I agree. In this case, there's no wrong answer as long as you're enjoying a good martini.
Exactly, but there might be a preference. So experiment and find out how you like it. If you like it more with the lemon garnish or the olive's, going to give it a much different.
Right, and that's also going to depend on the character of the
gin,
the character of the vermouth that you use. So again, all of those, give it a try. I did want to touch briefly on some different kinds of vermouths that are out there. So that I recommend. So as I said before, I'm not a huge fan of Martini and Rossi, neither their sweet or their dry vermouth. I am.
Don't buy it.
I am a fan of one that's fairly readily available is the Dolan Dry. I think that one's quite good. I'm not a huge fan of the Dolan Sweet Vermouth. It's a little wine forward for me, but the dry vermouth is quite nice. This is one of my favorite vermouth producers. So this is Via Vermouth from Quaddy Vineyards I believe it's in Sonoma County. And this one you can find at Total Wine and Bevmo, fairly easily. I think also we have it at Whole Foods down the road here. So this one can certainly be found, and it is quite tasty. I sometimes have had this or their sweet vermouth just on the rocks as an enjoyable aperitif. So this one's quite good. The one that I showed in the sort of preview cocktail was this one, Del Professore, which is a harder to find vermouth. That's a collaboration, I believe, between the Carpano folks and the Jerry Thomas bar in Rome. And this one is so good. I had a classic wet martini using that one yesterday. And
You had to import this, right?
not exactly, but it was a little harder to find. So, but the Dolan and the Via should be relatively easy to locate. And if you do come across a bottle of Del Professore, I recommend snapping it up. So we'll head on over to the cocktail party. Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to drink.
Oh, thank you all. Cheers.